Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'd like to welcome you to the latest edition of the Illumination Summit. Your speakers are ready and in position to deliver their insights on what cybersecurity experts can learn from the aviation industry. We ask that you put your seats in the upright position, buckle up, and get ready for takeoff. Enjoy!
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Illumination Summit, 4th edition. My name is Maria Lobato. I'm the CMO of Lumu Technologies, and I'll be your host for today's event. We have a packed agenda of about 90 minutes of content that we're about to go through. So please be sure to stay with me. I want to review the agenda with you really quickly. First, we're going to have our star speaker, Jeff Skiles, from the Miracle of the Hudson. Then we're going to have Forrester's Allie Mellen, and she will be helping us bring in cybersecurity safely down to earth. After that, we're going to have a quick demo of the brand Lumu free experience and a live Q&A, and then a lucky draw. So if you've been to our summits before, be sure to stay present. We do go a little fast. Be sure to ask questions using the Q&A feature. We do a live Q&A at the end of the session. And also stay with me until the end, because we're gonna have good gadgets, very good gadgets. We're gonna do the home mirror, home gym. We're gonna have the virtual reality goggles, which are a great source of entertainment, and the Bose sunglasses with the speakers, the Temple sunglasses. As we've done in other times, we do the lucky draw with those who are present at the end of the event. So again, stay with me. And before we introduce our keynote speaker, Jeff, I want to give you some context as to why we invited Jeff this time from the Miracle of the Hudson to our Illumination Summit. And for this, I want to introduce our founder and CEO, Ricardo Villadiego, RV, because he has a particular story about how this came about.
Hi, Maria. How are you?
All good, all good. So, RV, I thought it was important for us to share with our audience how this came about, because we had a soccer player, we've had a tennis champion, we've had a poker pro player and best-selling author in previous Illumination Summits. So I want to know, and I think we should share with the audience, what triggered the idea of having a pilot this time? How did it come about?
That's right. That's right. We're going in a very different direction this time on this Illumination Summit. I'm going to tell you the story, right? And the story is deeply connected in the very foundation of Lumu. I think it all started when I sold my first company and I had more time in my hands. I always have had a curiosity for airplanes and flying, and I decided to give it a go and learn how to become a pilot. And so I enrolled into a program to become a pilot. And then airplanes are fantastic machines, right? I'm oversimplifying here, but one of the things that makes me the most about these machines is that every airplane has a ground speed upon which the airplane is ready to fly. And again, I'm oversimplifying here, but as pilots, we focus on getting the plane to that speed when we're taking off, and that plane will fly. Now, landing is a very different story. It requires a bit more of exacting handling. And I remember my flying instructor telling me, Ricardo, you have to become proficient at landing. And as the audience already figured it out, English is not my first language. And the word proficiency doesn't translate naturally to my first language. So I asked David, my flying instructor, what do you mean by proficient? And he went on saying, well, man, if you take off a plane, you need to make sure that you land that plane. Otherwise, you're gonna get yourself killed. And you have to land that plane 100% of the time. He even went a little bit more to stress the point and saying, imagine that you go to the airport, You walk to the gate where you're gonna board a plane that's gonna take you to the city to where you're heading today. And the monitor on that gate says that the pilot of that plane can only land 98% of the time. Would you board that plane? And then that thought stuck in my head, right? And I started translating proficiency into cybersecurity. And I translate that into the ability to defend our organizations 100% of the time. So at least to control the impact that cybercrime has in our companies 100% of the time, so that we can prevent the catastrophic effect of attacks, a breach, a ransomware incident, and so on and so forth. In recent aviation, there's probably no better example of proficiency than the miracle of the Hudson. And water landing an Airbus 320 in the middle of the Hudson is far from being ideal. But that day, proficiency saved lives. And I think there's no better person to share that story than the man that was right in the cockpit that day. That's why we invited Jeff Skiles to join the Illumination Summit today.
That's such a great story. Thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. I think we're ready then to welcome our special guest. The wait is officially over. Let's introduce our keynote speaker as he deserves, Jeff Skiles.
Cool.
Cactus 1549, runway 4, clear for takeoff.
Cactus 1549, clear for takeoff. I'll never get over how beautiful it is up here.
Life's easier in the air.
Mayday, 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 this is Cactus 1549. I've lost thrust on both engines. We are turning back towards LaGuardia. No one warned us. No one said you were going to lose both engines at a lower altitude than any jet in history. This was dual engine loss at 2,800 feet, followed by an immediate water landing with 155 souls on board. No one has ever trained for an incident like that. We're going to end up in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus?
This is the captain. Brace for impact.
My name is Jeff Skiles, and that handsome Hollywood actor with the amazingly full head of hair was playing me in the movie Sully. Now, the movie was about the personal struggle that Sully and I faced in the investigation that ensued after the accident. But what the movie didn't highlight was how the investigation brought forth the successes of the airline industry over the last several decades that has led to our amazingly safe accident record. Specifically in fostering professionalism, training, and process that creates a structure around our employees, allowing them to deliver at their highest level. Within our industry, the miracle on the Hudson was not seen as a failure because the airplane crashed. Rather, it was seen as a success because the dramatic landing on the Hudson River avoided the adverse outcome, passenger death or serious injury. The miracle on the Hudson was studied for lessons to be learned by industries as diverse as medicine and oil field management. Even the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission profiled the miracle on the Hudson in its Safety Culture Communicator publication, lauding the industry for the tenets of a positive safety culture, including problem identification and resolution, work processes, continuous learning and training, respectful work environment, and a questioning attitude. The very foundations of what the airline industry has built in its safety management system. The truth is that the airline industry in the United States is amazingly safe. The last fatal accident in the US was 21 years ago in 2001. And this in a country that has over 10 million commercial flights each and every year. This didn't happen by accident. It happened with purpose, by not just striving to meet the letter of the law, but by daring to dream of a day when we would far exceed the requirements of regulators. I think that there are many parallels between aviation and cybersecurity. We both work in an environment where sudden disruptions require immediate and coordinated action. We're viewed as industries where there's no acceptable margin for error. Even a 1% failure rate is unacceptable. And on a personal level, we work in industries where your entire career can be judged on your performance of one moment of time, or in my case, 208 seconds, the time between impacting a flock of Canada geese and landing in the cold January waters of the Hudson River. In aviation, we've created a resilient safety management system by focusing on the cockpit. As Lumu Technologies puts it, being proficient, not just current. For myself, as a pilot, currency is making 3 takeoffs and landings every 90 days. Proficiency is delivering a safe, comfortable, and uneventful flight every single time. But proficiency is even more than that. Proficiency is being prepared for the worst, even though you may not expect it. Proficiency is planning ahead for the unlikely scenario. I'll give you an example that I use every time I fly. In our simulator training, one of the most commonly failed maneuvers is what we call the go-around. Tower tells you to go around because there's an airplane on the runway. It's sudden, it's unexpected, and it requires you to react immediately. How do you prepare for that? Well, the proficient pilot plans for the unexpected. Proficient pilots run through that procedure in their heads or even voice it to the other pilots as they're coming in and descending to land. I'll simply say, if we have to do a go-around, I'll call go-around, flaps 20, positive rate, gear up, set missed approach altitude at 500 feet LNAV, at 1,000 feet VNAV. Now, you don't need to know what all that means, other than understanding that preparing for the uncommon event is part of being a complete and proficient pilot or cybersecurity expert. Now, Sully is the most capable and proficient airline pilot that I've ever flown with. He pays attention to the smallest of details, and he certainly represents the finest of our profession. In an interview that I heard once, Sully equated his career to a bank account where he spent decades making small deposits of knowledge, of skill, of technique, so that over the Hudson River, he could make one very large withdrawal. But that didn't happen by accident. The airline world is a bit different than many industries. Decisions that can have a great effect on operations, safety, even profits, often filter down to frontline employees like those of us in the cockpit. In the airline cockpit, there's no ability to find out what your boss wants to do about a problem. You must make a decision, and you must live with the consequences. And this is why it's critically important for pilots to be armed with the procedures and systems to help them be successful, and be prepared through extensive training to use those systems properly. When I first entered the industry 36 years ago now, we didn't have any of the tools we needed to address an emergency of this order. Safety efforts had been primarily focused on making the airplanes better, safer, and more reliable. But we found that accidents still persisted. As the industry eliminated mechanical factors for accidents, one glaring cause remained: pilot error. The term used for an accident not caused by circumstance or by mechanical failure, but by human mistake. We hadn't placed any emphasis on making the people better and giving them the tools to operate and interact with technology. We had a vertical management system dating to the early days of aviation, a system where the captain often had ruled his cockpit by authoritarian rule. As a first officer, I would be hesitant to point out an error to a captain, and nobody had ever heard of a safety management system. Being a pilot was really more of a trade than a profession, and there was little standardization of process in the cockpit. We had a safety management system that was limited by the capabilities of the person in charge, the captain. But it was understood that the industry had to do better. Airliners traveling at close to the speed of sound, 7 miles up in the air, were simply too complex and fast-paced for one person to control, like in the early days of aviation. In the late 1980s, United Airlines pioneered what was then called cockpit resource management. They gave their pilots training and be trained in interpersonal skills to communicate and to work together as a team, and to appreciate the value of all employees and the role that they play in delivering the product to our customers. My airline, US Airways, quickly followed. We learned that a captain has resources, the cockpit and the cabin crew, most obviously, but also many others in delivering the products to our customers. You have air traffic controllers, maintenance personnel, dispatchers, people who he can draw upon for information to inform decision-making. It really took a decade or more to change our ingrained culture. Some who couldn't make the adjustment simply left in retirement. But we eventually understood that the cockpit and cabin crews were a cohesive team, and we could depend on each other to deliver a product that was greater than the sum of its parts. But safety improvements still had a long way to go. We had to get every pilot following the same procedures, not doing their own thing in the cockpit. This was done by developing standard operating procedures to allow us to work together as a team, with everyone doing things the same way every single time. I'll give you one small example of the myriad structured procedures that we use to trap errors every day. 30 years ago, we had a problem with rapid descent approaches, a situation where the air traffic controller would keep us too high, or the pilot would simply misjudge his approach, and he'd be attempting to land the airplane too fast with too high a sink rate. I remember they would put up posters in the crew room to warn us of this and to tell us basically not to do it. But it didn't really affect the rate. We weren't able to diminish the number of these high descent approaches. So instead, we created a procedure. The airplane has an automatic call out that comes over the speakers from our radar altimeter system. At 1,000 feet on descent to landing, a automated voice will call out 1,000. We use that to create a gate for decision making. At 1,000 feet, when I come into land, I have to have the landing gear down, the flaps set for landing, the before landing checklist complete. We have to be within our 1,000. We have to have a descent rate of less than 1,000 feet per minute, and our airspeed has to be no greater than 10 knots faster than our ref speed and no less than 5 knots below our ref speed. If I see all of that, all of those parameters, I have to voice it. I have to say stable. And if I can't say stable, I have to say go around. And we go around and come back and try again. At 500 feet, the pilot monitoring also goes through that litany, makes those checks, and says stable. This is a means of creating a decision gate in a safe position rather than having us try to land the airplane too fast or too high a descent rate. We reduce or eliminate simple human errors by using 2 brains and 2 sets of eyes to cross-check all critical inputs. We reduce or eliminate, we brief for each other for every takeoff, approach, and landing so that both pilots are on the same page. And we're not afraid to say that we make mistakes because we are human. But we find ways to mitigate those threats, to avoid the resultant adverse outcome. But this is not just a one-time effort. Just as we have a constantly changing environment, we have a learning safety management system. The industry has always been good at learning from accidents. We have an entire arm of the federal government, the National Transportation Safety Board, charged with investigating accidents and proposing changes to make sure that they never happen again. But how can we learn from incidents to prevent accidents? How can we learn from those mistakes that are caught before anyone is harmed? In aviation, we constantly sample and track the mistakes and errors that are occurring in the pilot group and creating threats to safety. We use a variety of methods to identify threats in our environment. The primary one is by asking ourselves. We self-report mistakes. If I level out at the wrong altitude, for instance, and possibly cause a conflict with another aircraft, I will report that error. Now, why would I do that? Why would I tell my employer that I made a mistake? Because it is so important to find out what these threats are, some of them simply because people are human, that we actually have a signed legal agreement between our Pilots Association, the federal regulators, and our airline, saying that if we report mistakes that we make, why we made them, what we think were contributory factors, we are absolved of any responsibility for them. We don't hide our errors. We're eager to report them because of that immunity. Give up the ability to reprimand or punish the individual for merely being human and making human mistakes, to give safety managers greater knowledge of the threats that are faced by all in the workplace. We also have flight deck observers that audit. They sit in our jump seats and watch every single thing we do. And the aircraft themselves also automatically report certain parameter exceedances, like those excessive descent rates too near the ground that I used in an earlier example. These reports are all de-identified. Our names are removed by a gatekeeper before being passed on for analysis. The corporation has a separate safety department that's a direct report to the president. And the safety department compiles and tracks this data to watch for trends, for threats to safety experienced not by the individual, but by the group. The goal isn't to test or evaluate us as individuals. If one pilot makes a small error that's trapped by procedure, it's unimportant. If 10 pilots are making the same mistake at the same point in the flight, it demands an organizational response. We need to change something that we're doing. When a threat warrants, the safety department develops a procedure or a mitigating strategy to trap that threat. Most people learn from their own experiences or anecdotally, from those of others. Through these mechanisms, we learn from the collective experiences of the group. At the time of this accident, over 5,000 pilots at US Airways. We utilize all manner of tools in the cockpits to guard against threats and mistakes, checklists, required callouts, quick reference handbooks of emergency procedures, briefings before takeoff and landing, and cockpit flows. We use these to trap errors. We accept that pilots are human beings and human beings make mistakes. I make mistakes every time I fly, but they're unimportant because they're caught by a checklist, by a flow, by a procedure, or by one of the other pilots. We enhance the best that humans have to offer, and we compensate for the worst. From a 30,000-foot level, we evaluate the mistakes that people make. We devise procedural solutions to trap those mistakes, to create a barrier to error before they ever lead to an adverse outcome. Every year, a pilot attends a week-long training cycle of classroom and simulator events, introducing new procedures or focusing and emphasizing existing procedures that the sampling of the pilot group shows that they are just proved lax in following. While we do still demonstrate maneuvers like we used to, engine failures on takeoff, instrument approaches, steep turn stalls, for instance, now the emphasis on our training is on problem solving, on utilizing resources, decision-making, managing time, creating barriers to error. Change becomes constant within the organization as new threats are identified and new procedures are implemented. We created the team, and it's far larger than the flight and the cabin crew. We gave them the tools and guidance to act correctly, even in crisis. And we constantly watch for threats to success and create barriers to those threats. That's how you learn and grow as an organization. And that's how you continuously improve and use today's adversity to be better tomorrow. Now, this is to take nothing away from Sully. He's an accomplished aviator and a remarkable man. He's the team leader who brings this all together, the tip of the spear, in a far greater effort. In fact, all those years ago, Sully actually wrote and taught the first cockpit resource management classes at my airline. So what do I want you to take away from this? Sully and I were prepared and trained to handle this extreme crisis. We were prepared and trained because of the leadership shown at all levels of the airline, because of the willingness of the airline to look inward and question what we do and continuously change to meet developing threats, and to place primary emphasis on supporting frontline employees like Sully and I in the cockpit so that we can be successful, because our success is organizational success. So let's bring this back to the cockpit that day over the Hudson. 20 years ago, Sully would have been incredibly task saturated. He would have had to have flown the airplane, been responsible for restarting the engines, had to do everything really, while I would be relegated to little more than an assistant waiting for orders that he was far too busy to command. Today, we both fly the airplane with integrated checklists, systems, and procedures. In this case, all I had to hear was Sully say, "my aircraft." And that's our standard terminology for transferring control. He flew the airplane, but I knew that my role had changed to one of pilot monitoring, and that has specific tasks that I have to perform, particularly in emergencies. I immediately picked up my quick reference handbook and found the proper emergency checklist to prepare us for a crash landing. Our flight attendants in back only had to hear Sully say over the public address telephone, "brace for impact," to start into their emergency preparedness planning. They chant, "brace, brace, heads down, stay down, brace, brace, heads down, stay down," over and over and over again to get the passengers in the proper position for a crash landing. There wasn't a lot of verbal communication over the river. We never made eye contact, but we knew what was in each other's heads. We accomplished our individual roles, but we also worked together seamlessly in a very stressful situation. Even in the most challenging circumstances that I will ever experience, communication did not break down. The team did not break down. And this didn't occur from years of working together. I had never flown with Sully before this trip. I only met him 3 days before the miracle on the Hudson. It was our training, our procedures, our systems, the tools provided to us by airline management. We had spent decades making the machine safer, but only by focusing on our people and giving them the tools to be successful and work with our amazing technology could we truly achieve safety in the airline industry. That's my presentation on the miracle on the Hudson. Thank you for allowing me to share it with you. And I'd also like to thank the Lumu team and give RV the opportunity to ask some questions.
Thank you, Jeff. So inspirational and remarkable history that you have shared with us today. I want to thank you for taking some time of your busy schedule to share that with us and with our audience, and go a little bit deeper into avoiding and managing a crisis. So let's get right into it. What advice would you give to others when it comes to responding to the unexpected?
You know, it kind of sounds trite to say, expect the unexpected, but that's our job, my job and your job. We need to accomplish the everyday activities of our employment, but we also need to be prepared for that moment when our entire careers can hang in the balance.
Thank you. I think when we translate that into cybersecurity, right, we as cybersecurity professionals, day in and day out, are also fighting the unexpected, right? That alert, that small sign that one of our assets is contacting adversarial infrastructure that may end in a catastrophe. So that's kind of the analogy. Next question would be, how this experience influence you or change your way of thinking afterwards?
I guess I gained a tremendous appreciation for the preparation and training that I have received from my airline. I would be the first one to tell you that, you know, in an emergency, I wouldn't remember anything, you know, that I'd be grasping for straws. But what I found out is that you remember everything. Your education, your training, and your planning come to you when you need it.
Cool. You know, translating that into cybersecurity, we see day in and day out that when a ransomware incident that is very popular today, or when a breach incident and data is exfiltrated, you know, the companies take cybersecurity more seriously. But I think what we have learned from you today is the consistent process. Those small deposits that you do in the bank can allow you to make a large withdrawal to prevent a catastrophe. So that's something that we definitely need to learn more in cybersecurity, how to build this consistency in building reliability into the processes that the cybersecurity operators deal with every day. Here's another question, and it is closer to me because I watched the film. As you know, I love flying too, and when the wars were going in the Hudson came, did you for a moment think we're not gonna make it, or did your training enable you to focus on the tasks that you have to do?
I think that the training was very beneficial to us. First of all, I always thought it was our best possibility, just simply because if you look at the pictures, you're completely surrounded by vast urban area. There's just no place to set this airliner down. So I always thought that was our best option. And I also always thought that it would be successful too. I never had any doubts, never any fear for my life. But, sometimes you just have to play the hand that you're dealt. The river wasn't a great option, but it was there and it was valuable, and it's something that we were able to use.
Interesting. In cybersecurity, attacks evolve every day, and it's unfair for the cybersecurity practitioners to think that a strategy that was planned 2 years ago or 10 years ago is the one that you have to put in place with the attack that you're facing today. And I think what is remarkable from what you shared today is that you deal with the situation at hand and you make possible the best outcome from that situation. That's something that we also have to do in cybersecurity, is to make sure that we deal with the attack that we have facing in that specific moment. So I imagine that going through the post-incident investigation was taxing for you, to say the least. How was that process, to the point that you can share here? How taxing was that to be under the microscope of the post-crash investigation?
It's a very thorough investigation, and frankly, it's very intrusive. For instance, they called up and they interviewed every captain that I had flown with for the previous 6 months before the incident. And the investigation actually goes on for a year. But you have to understand what the purpose is. The purpose is good. The purpose is to investigate the incident and find out what we can learn to make sure that it doesn't happen again, so that we can make aviation safer. So while it's certainly uncomfortable for the people who are involved, like Sully and I, it's a noble purpose. And I think if you keep that in mind, which I did at the time, you really understand that this is necessary and that it's actually helping safety for the airline world and for me in the future.
In cybersecurity, as in aviation, right, a safe landing doesn't make any headline, right? A catastrophe, unfortunately, does a headline. The cybersecurity operator on stopping attacks doesn't make the headlines. The breach, the ransomware attack makes the headline. So I think we need to get used more to that level of scrutiny. But as an industry, we have to come together to embrace those post-breach incidents and to learn from those post-breach incidents with the intention to avoid that to happen in the future. Now, visibility was great that day for the landing in the Hudson. But in general, I know you fly larger airplanes now into some of the most complex airports in the world. And I understand that the plane can land with near 0 meters of visibility in some airports, like in Chile, for instance. What's the role of visibility in avoiding a catastrophe?
Well, you're right. We can land the airplane with essentially 0 visibility. The airplane lands itself. And the airplane will land itself. It'll bring the nose down. The only time I actually touch the controls is when I knock the autopilot off and put my feet on the brakes as we finally slow down to a taxi speed. That's the capability that we have with airplanes today. So in our case, of course, visibility was very good. So it was we were able to see the river. We were able to align ourselves with it and flare for the touchdown. And a lot of times, though, when we talk about visibility in aviation, we're talking about preparation, planning ahead, seeing that unexpected far ahead so that we can react and change. If you see a thunderstorm that's on your path 100 miles ahead of time, now is the time to decide, Should we go around it to the left, to the right? Which way is the wind blowing, for instance? How far away from the thunderhead should we plan to be? And then take a radar vector at this point where it's safe to get around it. Visibility is often obviously what we see, but it's also what we plan.
In cybersecurity, visibility is so important as well, Jeff, because it is impossible for a cybersecurity team to defend an asset that we don't know exists in our networks. But it's also critically important to say that it's impossible to defend attacks against attacks that we don't know are coming our way. So visibility is so important in cybersecurity as well. And we're going to go deeper into visibility as this summit evolves. So any practical lessons that you learned from the investigation and that now have been incorporated into the day of aviation?
Yes, I mean, this was, if you want to call it a successful accident, which is kind of a misnomer, but it was. So you might think that there was not much to be learned. Nobody, most of the people walked away. Nobody was seriously injured. But in aviation, we can learn something from virtually any incident. And in fact, in our case, what they discovered was that our checklist, particularly the ones that I was using, weren't really appropriate to the situation. My checklist was 3 pages long. It involved many things that were critically important, but were at the end of the checklist. Because it was designed into the scenario of that you had time. You were 30,000 feet, you had both engines fail, you had plenty of time to drift down and accomplish it. It wasn't designed to be done at 3,000 feet in 3 minutes time. So now we've actually changed our checklist to allow for that. You make the decision, is it time critical or is it not? And that takes you down a different path.
Interesting. Something that we definitely need to do in cybersecurity as well is to learn from those incidents, is to incorporate the learning into the day-to-day of our cybersecurity operations. My next question, it's in regard with some words that I guess the world knew from the film Sully, right? He said, "I couldn't have a better partner that day." And you kind of alluded to that during your speech. What do you think? What the two of you makes such an effective team that day?
Well, a lot of people are surprised at that because, as I said, there's 5,000 pilots just at this small airline that I worked for. And so people are surprised that we fly with people every day that we don't know. Normally, when I go to work, I sit down and I work with people that I have never met before. But that's why it's so critically important to have the system that we can work in, our training, our procedures, our systems. And I never met Sully before, just 3 days before that incident. But I knew what he would do in any given circumstance, and he knew the same of me. And that was critically important to us working together as a team.
Interesting. Teamwork is such a, I guess, such a skill that it's needed in cybersecurity as well. I think, often tell my prospects and customers, the cybersecurity team by itself is not going to be able to defend the organization. It's the entire group of employees that partner together to defend the organization, and what's going to maximize the chances to the cybersecurity team to do a better job. One last question, Jeff. A last word of advice to people that are making quick decisions to prevent the worst.
Well, you have to make quick decisions, as you do and as we do. Sometimes it involves trying to slow it down if it's possible to do that. And how do I do that? If I'm going on a flight, for instance, as I just got back, my last one from Rio de Janeiro, the night before, I'm looking at my charts. I've never been there before. What does the airport look like? What are the approaches? how am I going to taxi around? Things like that. Trying to prepare myself for it so that I'm ready to make those quick decisions when I need to. But primarily, it's basically following your training, following your procedures. Those will see you through to success.
Preparation, proficiency in the field. Thank you, Jeff. It has been such a great pleasure to have you on today, joining the Illumination Summit and getting your insights. And I'm sure that our audience is thrilled. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much.
And now we'll attempt to bring cybersecurity safely back to Earth. But I won't be doing that alone. I have a great guest joining me, and I think she's one of the most influential voices in cybersecurity today. Let's give her a warm welcome with this short video. All right, Allie, very excited to have you here today, joining me on this Illumination Summit. Following our theme, let's attempt to bring cybersecurity back to Earth. Allie, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
All right, let's get right into it. We had 7 questions for you today so that we can illuminate our participants into some of the most important topics in cybersecurity. Number 1, how do you advise organizations to separate the useful from the noise? Cybersecurity is a noisy market, right? So what is your advice when making purchasing decisions on technologies in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so this is a great question because you're absolutely right. There is a lot of noise. I've definitely seen this at Forrester for being here for over a year and a half. I've gotten to know a lot of the vendors quite well, and I've seen a lot of the noise. So to kind of break this down, I want to let you in a little on how I actually define markets, because I think that this really helps the conversation, helps structure the conversation around what's important to practitioners. So I tend to break down market segments into a couple of different requirements, 3 actually. The first is capability, the second is dependencies, and the third is time to value. If a new technology is able to meet all 3 of these requirements in a differentiated way, if there's enough traction in the industry, and of course, if there's enough client interest, that's when I actually start to define a new market segment. And this is really important because these 3 things are really critical for practitioners to understand as they're choosing whether or not to adopt a new technology, but we often don't hear a lot about 2 of them. We often most hear about the capability side, what the technology actually does. This is what we hear about in marketing messages and high-level conversations, or when people are talking to sales. And it ultimately covers what the technology does, how it addresses some of the challenges that a practitioner has better than what they already have, and also potentially what the technology replaces. But these other 2 are actually incredibly important for CISOs. The first being dependencies. So this is the much less fun side of tech. This is the actual management and operation, the maintenance behind the scenes for the tool. What dependencies exist? What does maintenance look like for the tool? What will employees need to do? And how many employees will you need to use the technology? How is it licensed? All the nitty-gritty that is incredibly important as CISOs are thinking about what they need to buy, but often doesn't come up until much later in the buying cycle. And then lastly is time to value. So when am I actually going to be able to use this thing? What is the time to value? How do I deploy it? What risks exist during the migration? These 3 requirements give a much more complete view of a new technology prior to adoption by a CISO. And it's really important to understand these 3 to get a better picture and to try to kind of ask these questions to cut through some of that noise. And then the last thing that I'd recommend is wholeheartedly, the most important part of this process is the POC, actually getting your hands on the product and seeing what it does. This is really critical because it lets you see what your team is going to be capable of doing with it, whether or not your team's comfortable with it, how they feel about it. And ultimately, it gives you a much better understanding of a new product than just reading their website or reading the data sheet. So those are the definite requirements that I think about and that I recommend to practitioners.
So capability, dependency, time to value, and the POC. Do not forget about that. We're all in on that as well, Ali. So, number two, we get asked a lot about what can be done in the middle of a cybersecurity crisis, right? Which is not much because you're already in the middle of the mess. What is the advice that would you give companies to get ahead of a crisis?
Yeah, so I think about this in two parts, and I know that this really does often come up that preparation is key, but truly it is. Build incident response plans and test them across the organization. This is a lot like what Jeff was saying just now about his experience in aviation. Checklists matter. Checklists are important. It's also really helpful to build in redundancies. Again, as Jeff was saying, you don't want one little mistake to affect an entire event, which is why those redundancies are so important. We also have data that proves this at Forrester. Organizations that struggle with incident and crisis response preparation spend a median of $3 million per breach, as opposed to those that do not have those same challenges, those who are prepared, who spend 2.4 million. So it's quite a big difference to having an incident response plan in place and tested, and also tested across the entire organization, not just the security team, but also marketing, sales, customer success, operations. Everyone involved, everyone needs to be involved, since ultimately they will be in the event of a breach. Now, when it comes to actually being in the middle of a breach, the best recommendation that I have is stay calm, identify the people who are able to stay calm in the middle of a crisis and use them as much as possible. And ultimately, transparency is key. A lot of the organizations that have handled breaches the best have been transparent about them to their customers and to the public. And they've been able to communicate what's happening and why, and not try to hide it or try to persuade their customers or employees to keep it secret. Ultimately, breaches happen, and the best way to respond to them is by taking responsibility and by leading through the example that you set to other organizations.
Very insightful. I often tell the best way to prepare to a crisis is to avoid the crisis, but you're right. Let's go into detection of incidents, right? Of detection of threats. What do you think is the biggest detection gap in most cybersecurity programs today?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So consistently, this is again some Forrester data, consistently over the past 5 years, one of the top 3 challenges for security teams is the changing and evolving nature of IT threats. This really has an effect on me when I see it, because you would think that after 5 years, this would change, but it hasn't. It is still one of the top 3 issues, along with day-to-day tactical activities taking up too much time and the complexity of the IT environment. So ultimately, from a detection perspective, the biggest gap is being able to keep up with new threats. That is a huge challenge for practitioners. But I do want to go one level deeper, because ultimately it's about a lot more than this. One of the reasons that Zero Trust has caught hold the way that it has is because a huge part of doing detection well is also having those basics right and being able to have an infrastructure that you can actually have visibility into, that you can actually manage, that you have protection and controls in place to help prevent a lot of these detections from having to happen. So when I think about the biggest gaps for detection, it's actually not having the controls and protections in place that we need to prevent the need for more detection taking place, and to try and constrain detection to what's really, really dangerous and what's really, really sophisticated. So I think about it through the lens, not just of, hey, we're struggling to detect these latest threats, but also, hey, we need to improve our protection and control strategy to make sure that we don't actually have to detect as many things as we're seeing. I think that oftentimes, much like we were talking about earlier, detection is the flashy, interesting part of cybersecurity, which is part of why I cover it and why I really enjoy it. But we need to remember all of the other aspects that play a role in that, and protection in particular is so important here.
So interesting to get your point of view on that. I'm sure the audience must be thrilled with that as well. Talking about detection, let's go into an area that I know you're covering closely, which is XDR, right? This new trendy topic. And the cybersecurity industry has evolved into EDR, XDR, NDR. How do you see the evolution of this market? What the buyer needs to keep in mind when they are bombarded with these different messages?
Yeah, so this is actually a really great question, and I'm very, very glad you asked it, because I have spent over a year and a half, actually, since I joined Forrester, researching XDR. It was the first thing that I was tasked with doing once I joined Forrester. So I actually wrote the first defining piece on what XDR is for Forrester. I also did a new tech on the space, which is really a market overview of all the vendors at play today, and a new wave, which evaluated many of the top vendors in the space today. So I've gotten a pretty good overview of what XDR is, and been able to even talk to some clients and customers who are both considering XDR and have actually started using it. So it's given me a really good understanding of where the market is today. And ultimately, the XDR market is a battle between precedent and innovation. So what do I mean by that? In order to understand what I mean by that, we have to start with SIM. The SIM is precedent. It's what we're used to. Take in as much data as possible to give, hopefully, a lot of visibility, give flexibility in things like queries and analytics, and the ability to bring in whatever data you want. And you can see this has manifested and maintained over time. The SIM has been the center of the SOC for probably since the SOC has been around. I mean, it's been over 20 years that we've seen the SIM in use. And the way that we at Forrester think about the SIM is as security analytics platforms, which is really the next evolution of SIM. When you think about how SIMs have begun to consolidate, or have ultimately consolidated capabilities with user behavior analytics, and then also SOAR capabilities. This combination of SIM, SOAR, and UBA is a security analytics platform. It's looking to go beyond what was originally a very compliance-oriented offering into a real detection and response lifecycle tool, really owning up to the center of the SOC. And so this has been really useful because of the customizability that you're able to get from the SIM, that you're able to get from SOAR. You can ultimately have your team create whatever playbooks you want, create whatever rules you want, create whatever integrations you want. But there's a challenge with this. And that is namely that our talent pool doesn't have the security skill set or the time to do this work. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but some of the top challenges for security leaders are day-to-day tactical activities taking up too much time, and also not having the skill set that they need in-house. And so this has added some complexity where security teams are struggling a bit. If you think about a typical detection engineering function, it requires not only a detection engineer, but also a threat intel manager and a threat hunter to be able to find more threats. And that combination, that is expensive, that is hard to find, that is hard to retain. So we actually saw a different approach coming to market over the past 10 years, which has been EDR. And EDR philosophy is really that the endpoint is where the highest efficacy telemetry is. It's where the business data is kept, and it's one of the most important places to be able to detect from and to gather information from. And that's been very successful. We've seen that through the EDR market and also through the success of the MDR market. There's a lot of valuable telemetry that you can get from the endpoint, but a couple of problems here too. The first being that there's a lot more data that's important than just the endpoint, than just what's available on the endpoint. You know, when I talk to practitioners, if I tell them that I'm thinking about taking away their network analysis and visibility tools, they say you can take it out of my cold dead hands. Like they have zero interest in losing that visibility because it is so important to them. It's where they have a lot of sources of detection. It's a very important tool. And so ultimately what incident responders have to do is they have to take their EDR alerts and bring them into the SIM anyway, because they need to correlate and enrich them with other sources like network, like identity, like now cloud. So that's one problem. The second challenge with this is that the business data is no longer on the endpoint. It's now in the cloud. And so ultimately, EDR vendors have faced a bit of an existential crisis because their importance is no longer as high as it once was. So these two factors have motivated EDR vendors to actually try to shift to a different strategy, which is XDR. It's about bringing more telemetry into the tool than has been brought in previously to provide more context, more visibility, and to hopefully maintain the importance of the EDR vendor ultimately. So this combination is very important because a lot of practitioners want that mix of data coming from not only their endpoints, but also from things like network, from things like identity, from things like cloud. So this mix is really critical. And ultimately, what we've seen is that practitioners get a lot of value out of this because in a lot of cases, the vendor is able to do some of the detection engineering on the back end for them. And so it's able to reduce some of the load that we classically see on security teams and help them be more productive and more effective at stopping some of these threats.
Cool. It's very interesting because in the conversations that I have with a lot of prospects, they often tell me, Ricardo, if I will start my SOC again, I would probably start in a very different way than it is today. And you're very right that the centerpiece of the SOC is the SIEM. Now, going back to the SOCs, how do you see the SOCs evolving? What is going to happen in that transformation? How the security operations centers use data, operate data, and ultimately create value to the organization?
This is a great question. I love this question because I'm actually doing quite a bit of research on it as well. It's very important to me since I do cover security operations to cover these kinds of critical questions, like what does the current state of the SOC look like? And also what does the future look like? So the future of the SOC through this research I found is ultimately as a service to the rest of the organization. It is about providing a service to the rest of the business that's effective and that's high quality and that ultimately can lead the way to better alignment with the business. And so I think about this coming in 5 different parts. First, the most important thing that you can do today is to start identifying ways to measure success and measure waste within your SOC as it is right now. This is really important because actually finding ways to measure this information is very hard for a SOC. It's very hard to measure success in the SOC, but it's really critical to understanding where you're not performing well or where you could be performing better. And it's important to think about it in the context of the entire organization, not just what's happening in the security team itself. The second is we need to start using automation in a more targeted and effective way. The way that I've seen SOAR work in a lot of production environments is very challenging. You get 2 to 3 playbooks, and that's about where you max out in terms of what you can actually automate on as grand a scale as a full-fledged playbook. So it's important for us to identify ways that we can use automation more conveniently and more organically in existing processes to take some of that load away. The third is building out individual skill sets through ultimately mentoring of newer analysts. For the SOC of the futures to succeed, we need every single person in the SOC to be a mentor and to be providing the knowledge that they have, spreading the knowledge that they have to newer analysts so that we can look to hire people who perhaps we had overlooked previously because of their lack of experience. Fourth is to augment your staff with an existing security service, whether that's MDR or whatever the security service of the future looks like. oftentimes vendors are the ones that are able to entice top talent. And so augmentation ultimately becomes a necessity, because what we see is that a lot of these vendors, they're able to pay more, they're able to give better benefits, they're able to give a better career path than you would necessarily see in an internal SOC. So being able to augment your staff with some of these individuals is really crucial. And lastly, and most importantly, is to serve the organization and to think about how you're serving the organization through the lens of employee experience and customer experience. Because regardless of the SOC being an internal function, it has an impact on the employees in the organization and also the perception from customers. So these are the 5 elements that I think are most critical when thinking about how to make the future of the SOC into a better and more effective and higher quality service to the rest of the organization that's also able to get what they need from the rest of the business.
It's interesting to see that the industry is evolving in a way that makes cybersecurity operation relevant than ever. And we truly believe that cybersecurity is a field that has to be operated. And it sounds like it's now also in the mindset of the whole industry and of course the cybersecurity practitioners. Ali, we're getting to the end of this interview. And I want to ask you 2 additional questions. Let's start with going back to the crisis, right? What type of people should we be in the lookout to prevent or to avoid a crisis? How companies can find their Jeff or their Sully that will make sure that the worst case scenario doesn't materialize when it comes to cybersecurity incidents?
Yeah. Look for people that have a track record of keeping their cool under pressure. And this will not always be people who are already in cybersecurity, former firefighters, EMTs, air traffic controllers, military personnel. You don't necessarily need to look for a veteran incident response professional to have someone who is really effective at managing a crisis. And further, if you're looking for a veteran incident response professional, they're going to be very difficult to find and also very difficult to retain. So make use out of people who have some of these adjacent functions and are able to really take point and lead on something like responding to a crisis because of their previous experience in other roles. I talked to Jake Williams about this a few years ago. And one of the things that he said as well is like how important it is to have that kind of experience prior to really understand what it's like to be in a true crisis and to know what you need to do, what next steps you need to take. So look for people who can have control and maintain control of a room, even when things are going all wrong.
Interesting to see how the skill set that's required to do the job evolves as technology evolves and facilitates new ways to do things. Thank you, Ali. Last question, and I promise you this is the last one. I kind of have someone from the industry in an interview and not ask about ransomware. So what is one of the things that cybersecurity professionals should know about ransomware and how to avoid it?
Yeah, so when it comes to ransomware, it's obviously a very hot topic. I see a lot of conversations that fluctuate between ransomware is totally special compared to other types of malware, and you need to treat it that way. And ransomware is like any other malware. They really move between those two. As with most things, the answer is ultimately going to be somewhere in between. Ransomware is different than other types of malware, but many of the steps to protect against it are similar. The biggest thing that organizations can do when they're thinking about their ransomware defense is prioritization. Prioritization is really key. In conversations with clients, a lot of times they'll come to me and they'll say, listen, I just want you to list out everything I can be doing to defend against ransomware, and I'll stop you when I have a question. And it made me realize that ultimately, there's a lot of confusion on what to prioritize and how to prioritize it and what that looks like, because there are just so many entry points that you could be affected by. So I like to think of managing your ransomware defense strategy around what you can do in the short, medium, and long term for success, and basing that around a couple of different dimensions for prioritization, things like cost, time to actually implement it, whether or not you need to buy a new tool or you can implement it natively within your environment based on the controls that you already have. Think about what you can do quickly that has a big impact that potentially doesn't cost very much, what you need to spend more time on, say a year to 2 years implementing, or what's a part of your long-term strategy. And really what I like to say is that when you get to the point of the long-term strategy, look at how that aligns to your zero trust strategy as well, because ultimately there's a ton of crossover and you don't want to be duplicating initiatives or having them be disjointed. And so a lot of ransomware defense in the long term is about the way that it fits into your zero trust strategy and is about having a zero trust strategy.
Ally Mellin from Forrester, thank you very much for sharing your experience and your insights with our audience today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. Maria, let's go back to you for the next portion of the program.
Wonderful. Thanks, Arvi and Ally, for that. Okay, so we're in the home stretch of this summit. We have our demo next, where we will talk about our brand new Lumu free experience. Let's do it.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nicole, or Nikki. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Lumu. And I just wanted to take some time to talk to you guys a little bit about Lumu, what we do, how we do it, and then talk, kind of walk you through a short demo, how to open a Lumu free account, what you're going to kind of see there, and then some of the elements of our other versions of Lumu. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here with you and just talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we believe here at Lumu and a little bit of background about us. So one of our foundational beliefs here at Lumu is that organizations, regardless of the size, regardless of the industry, should, and at this point in time, must be able to operate cybersecurity proficiently. And when we say operate cybersecurity proficiently, we mean, getting it right as much as possible, being on top of events, being able to manage that, understanding how that network flow happens and kind of what goes on behind the scenes to be able to respond to events in real time. So again, regardless of the size of the organization, regardless of the industry, there has to be some kind of a cybersecurity practice in place. And the way that we, think that this can be done is through our continuous compromise assessment model. So this is sort of the way that we, enable our customers to operate cybersecurity across their organization. So what continuous compromise assessment does is intentionally looks for compromise. So looking for any, instance where, there's something unusual happening with intention. So specific to that organization, specific to that, normal activity, looking for anything malicious, looking for anything that is out of the ordinary with intention, and not overloading you with too many alerts, making sure that when we show you that something is out of the ordinary or unusual, that, it's definitely something that needs to be paid attention to. And we do this on a continuous basis, continuous compromise assessment. So continuously looking for, that malicious activity in real time with intention, with purpose, 24/7, because, this can happen any time of the day. So being able to be on top of that and respond to that in real time, that's really what this solution enables you to do. And the other thing, the other component of our continuous compromise assessment model is measuring the effectiveness of other cybersecurity practices. So like I said, we're not overloading with too many alerts or showing you too much, but when we do, it's with intention, and it's definitely something that maybe went through one of your existing cybersecurity tools or solutions that you had in place. So it's going to be able to help you sort of pinpoint where there are potential weaknesses in existing solutions. And Lumu offers this in different ways. Like we said, different types of organizations, regardless of the industry, regardless of the size. So we have different tiers of Lumu that are flexible to be able to offer this level of visibility to all types of organizations, depending on their needs, right? So we have 3 different sort of forms or tiers of Lumu. The first one being Lumu free. So our Lumu free offering, really what it does is it looks for compromises across the networks, lets you know when that happens in real time. You have access to DNS, firewall, proxy log, metadata ingestion. So we're looking at all of that on behalf of your organization and letting you know when there's an issue, right? We also offer a custom API collector with our free tier and 2 data collectors. So it offers definitely some comprehensive visibility there with our free version. So it's free always. That's one of the great things about it, and it's flexible. Then we have 2 other tiers, and they provide a bit more context and a bit more information. So Lumu Insights, Lumu Defender. Insights specifically is going to give you a more granular level of visibility into these events. So it's going to let you know exactly, like at the asset level, which assets are in contact with adversarial infrastructure. So letting you know exactly what's going on and which devices are being impacted. So that's what you're going to see with Insights. You get more visibility, more context about these events and about the specific type of IOC that we're seeing contact with. You're going to get a lot more kind of context about that. And then Lumu Defender is essentially everything that you get with Lumu Insights, but with the ability to implement automated API responses and various out-of-the-box integrations. So we offer different types of out-of-the-box integrations that you're able to easily integrate with other elements of your cybersecurity stack. So those are the 3 versions of Lumu. Again, a lot of flexibility, and each version has its different benefits for different types of customers. So with that, I kind of wanted to walk you through the process of opening a Lumu free account, just so you can see how simple it is. It's very straightforward, very easy. So with that, I will walk you through the process. Let me just pull up my browser. So you'll go ahead and access the Lumu website, and you'll click right here where it says get a free account. You just enter your information. And then very straightforward, very easy here. You'll get a verification email to your inbox. So let's just look at that, just give you an idea of what that looks like, what you can look out for in terms of the email. So you'll receive an email like this, and then you just go ahead and access. So once your account is verified, you will then be prompted to log into the portal. And this will allow you to then go ahead and configure your account. Now, once you're logged in with your Lumu free account, you're going to go through the process of setting up your method for data collection in terms of the metadata. So, you have a lot of flexibility, different options in the way that you're able to collect metadata. And one of them is with a virtual machine. So let's say in this case, you have flexibility here, whether you're able to or not, but we'll just do the example that you're able to. And then you can select the type of metadata that you'd like to collect, whether that's firewall, proxy, DNS logs. We'll go ahead with the DNS ingestion. And then you have options in terms of, the server where you want to have this information. So whether you want to use Lumu as your primary network resolver, collected through your own DNS server, or through metadata logs. So let's just say we're going to use Lumu. And then you're going to be able to go ahead and name your virtual appliance. So this is where that metadata collection is going to take place. And one of the things that I want to point out is that we have a ton of documentation to help you through these steps. We're also always available to help you, personally, if you ever need that assistance in setting up your free account. We have various resources. You can schedule a call with us, access the documentation. Here you have various deployment guides on how to get started, how to configure your account, how the portal works. So there's a lot of resources out there, but again, we're also available to help you do that and helping you get set up. So let's just name this server anything. and then you're going to receive an activation code. Now, when you download that virtual appliance, this is the activation code that you're going to use to correlate that data metadata collection process. And then again, we have different options here for the type of virtual appliance that you're going to be running. So again, very flexible in terms of where you're able to set this up, and very different options that you have there. So with that, I want to just go ahead and walk you through a portal that we already have configured with some data. And this is going to be a Lumu free environment that I just want to walk you through. So let's go ahead and log in there. So this is a Lumu free account that we have configured. It has some events here. And basically what you're seeing here is all of the activity and all of the malicious activity that's been detected by Lumu free. So you're seeing the different types of events that we've detected, whether the contact with IOC was related to malware, phishing, so on and so forth. And you can get some more detail about those events here as well. So you go ahead and you can actually access these incidents. You can click on them to see a little bit more detail. When you select a specific incident, you're going to see a little bit of compromised context there. When you view the compromised context in more detail, it's going to give you an idea of how frequently your network has been in contact with this particular IOC. So as you can see here on the compromised radar, there have been 32 malicious contacts. So that's the amount of times that resources or assets in your organization have been in contact with this particular IOC. You can see, the amount of contact that you've had there. Again, just some visibility and, information about this particular IOC. If you want to know more, you can click on context and it shows you information about it. So through Lumu Free, you're able to see which this IOC was, what kind of threat it's related to. So in this particular instance, it's related to malware. You have related resources so you can understand exactly what's going on with this particular event. You have related files and information about that too. So again, it gives you kind of an overview of what's going on and how much contact you're having with these IOCs. And that's essentially what you're able to see there. The incidents tab, it's kind of a bird's eye view again of what's going on, the total number of incidents at a higher level, the different kind of events and the contacts that you're. Okay, so yeah, these are the events in the incidents tab and what you're able to see here. And that's Lumu Free at a high level. Now I wanted to show you some of the visibility that you're able to get with Insights and with Defender as well. So I'm just going to access that account here. And this is an overview of the view that you have with Lumu Insights. Now you're able to see, again, that activity at a high level. It's quite similar to what we saw in the free instance. However, in this case, you're going to be able to see that asset level visibility with these malicious events. So when you select an event and you want some more detail, in this case, you can go ahead and access that compromised context. And you can see detail about again, how often you're in contact with the adversarial infrastructure. And in this case, with the level of information that you're able to get with Insights, you have that asset level visibility. So you know exactly which assets across your organization are in contact with this particular IOC. And in this case, when you select the context, you get a little more information here. And then in the attack matrix, each of these events is actually linked to the MITRE attack matrix. So you get some more information about this particular attack type. You get some background about it, and you can adjust your response based on what you learn here through the MITRE attack matrix and some best practices there. So it's certainly a useful tool. All right, so that's what you're able to see there with Insights. That's just kind of the level of visibility. Really, the difference between Free and Insights is that granular asset level visibility and the ability to integrate with the MITRE attack matrix. So some of the other things I just wanted to kind of go through was the different collectors. You have your gateways here. You can manage all of that. Virtual appliances, agents. If you want to download those desktop agents, that's available as well. And then we have various options in terms of API integrations. You can add custom collectors and customizable APIs. It's very, very simple to do. And then you have different integrations here as well. So you have your API and your out-of-the-box integrations. So this is for attack response. When you want to take that real-time action, and this is the kind of level that you get with Lumu Defenders, the ability to integrate these apps and these out-of-the-box integrations that we offer. So we have various different integrations. They're very easy to configure. Again, these out-of-the-box ones are especially easy to configure. You have various options in the way that you're able to do that. So again, that's Lumu at a high level. You can always come in here, manage accounts, add other members of your organization to join you so that they can be able to take action on these events and take a look at really what's going on across your organization. So guys, that's what I wanted to share with you today. Appreciate your time. I'm going to be around for the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, let's start our Q&A. Ali and Jeff couldn't stay with us through this part, but we are sure to send them your questions, and we'll answer all of the questions via email. So we have a few questions for the Lumu team, so let's get started, all right? And to the audience, keep sending the questions. I took some names here: Max, Norma, Camille, Andres, Elkin, Chris, Carrie, Damien, Trevor, Tyler, Fernando, Leo, Jacob, Miguel, Andres, Abby, a bunch of people that we know, a lot of new people also. But let's get started with a couple of questions, okay? This one's for RV. Can you comment on the importance of having multiple layers of safety controls, checks, and never relying upon a single fault indicator or gouge? From Sean Slantry, RV.
Sure. Thank you, Maria. I think it's critically important to make sure that you trust but verify, right? And I think one of the advances that Lumu brings to the cybersecurity industry is just that: you have deployed your cyber defenses, you trust that your cyber defenses are working correctly, but now you have to verify if they're truly doing their job. And Lumu is that last resort that's assessing in real time what's going on in your network, and something is not moving in the right direction. Now you have the ability, like Nikki mentioned, to feed that information back into your cyber defense to aim to the ideal state, that state that we call the state of zero contacts with adversarial infrastructure.
Wonderful. Great question. One for Nikki. Does Lumu require a physical appliance?
No, Lumu does not require physical appliances. We are totally cloud-based.
Fantastic. So this is another question for you, RV. Do you believe that tools like Lumu can change the perception of business security against vulnerabilities for people like the C-suite, CEOs, CFOs who do not have the knowledge in maybe IT or network security within companies? What would be the best way to present tools like this to people without the IT knowledge?
That's a very good question. And I think a lot of what we had taught in Lumu as building the technology is in how we help the cybersecurity team to simplify the conversation with the C-suite, right, with the management. When we cybersecurity practitioners goes into a management conversation and start talking about the technicalities of a vulnerability and the probability of that vulnerability of being exploited, that conversation isn't really going to be impactful, and we may not get the action or the support that we are aiming from the management team. What we do at Lumu is simplify that conversation. There is an ideal state, and that state is called the state of zero compromise, zero contacts with adversarial infrastructure. Now there is a dashboard that highlight that in black and white, so that the conversation is really easier. And now the board knows that your ideal state, it's that state of zero contacts with adversarial infrastructure, and you have to do what you have to do to make sure that the company aims towards that state. Then that conversation becomes more simple and more easier to manage.
Awesome. Next question from Chris. Is Lumu able to see all the data, username, passwords that goes through the network? Nikki, do you want to take a crack at this one?
Sure. No. So We don't see that private personal information. What we gather is network metadata. So we're going off of that metadata and seeing that there's contact with the adversary. That's all that we need to know, that there's malicious contact in order to stop that. We take action in that way. So we do not see any sensitive information. We simply monitor metadata.
Awesome. Next question. Let's see if I can get through a couple more here. I know I told you 90 minutes, but we have just so many questions. RB, this one's for you about SIMs. How different does this work, Lumu work, from any SIM tool that organizations have already deployed, etc.?
I think Ali somehow alluded to that concept, right? I think the SIM started 20 years ago with this idea of let's collect all this data. It was mainly driven by compliance, and then more recently, the thought was now that we have all this data, let's extract some value from this data. So it was a tool that wasn't built for proficient threat detection. It was an afterthought on those tools. Not to say those tools are not needed anymore, but if you're looking for a tool that enables you to be efficient and effective at detecting threats, you're probably gonna be looking more of a tool like Lumu that was built from day zero on enabling you to be more efficient at detecting threats. If you're more efficient at detecting threats, you have that visibility that Jeff was talking about and how to plan to avoid a catastrophe in your organization.
Awesome. Let's try to do two more. Stay with me. I'm really giving those prizes away in a couple of minutes. I work for an MSP. Do you offer a multi-tenant console, Nikki?
Yes, we do. We have a multi-tenant portal environment that was designed specifically for MSP, so you can manage all of your customers from one place.
Fantastic. So we have actually another question from another industry analyst, Chris Steffen. So he's telling us the continuous compromise assessment environment is something that I strongly agree with, but it doesn't exactly fit with the Forrester vision of SIEM or XDR. Explain why the enterprise would need Lumu. RB.
Why the enterprise wouldn't need or would
need
I think the cybersecurity is an industry in transformation, right? It's evolving significantly, and it's evolving because there are new technologies that are available today for companies. So Lumu was born out of the convergence of three main evolutions. Number one is the amount of bandwidth that exists today. Number two is the unlimited computing power that we can get in the cloud that enables to run artificial intelligence in a way that is very, very efficient. And number three is the cost of storage, how small, how cheap is storing data today. Those three things enable us to build a technology like Lumu, where you can take all the network metadata from companies that we're protecting, take that into the cloud, run, store that in the cloud, and run using that computing power the analysis that you have to do to assess the state of compromise of an organization. So it is logic to understand that the analysts catch up with that evolution. And I will anticipate that's going to continue to happen through the next 18 to 24 months. The good thing here, like Ali was mentioning as well, is use those three elements. Use the value that the tool can provide to you, the dependencies. They do a POC so that you understand the value that the tool enables you in your cybersecurity system, so that you deploy something that can help you to be more effective in your day-to-day. Sorry to extend me a little bit here, Maria, but I often make this example, right? 25 years ago, we were all using maps, physical maps, to drive in cities, right? 25 years ago. Who's using that today? No one's using that today. So 20 years ago was the time of the SIEM. Nowadays, there are technologies like Lumu that enable you to do the job in a way that's more effective.
Fantastic. Well, we do have a lot more questions. We do have questions about how to become a partner. We do have questions about pricing. Most of this information you can find on our website, including pricing, becoming a partner, all of that stuff. I want to thank you, Nikki and RV, for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, and thank you all for joining today.
Wonderful. I want to thank you for being here for 98 minutes now. I hope you enjoyed the summit. We have one more video and then you'll be on your way, and we hope to see you next time. Bye now.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have arrived at your destination. On behalf of the crew at Lumu Technologies, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed the insights provided by our speakers and gained a new perspective on operating cybersecurity proficiently. Remember to claim your Lumu free account at lumu.io, and we'll see you at the next Illumination Summit.